In this video, we will be dividing whole numbers by two-digit divisors. Let's look at the problem above. Mrs. Kelly is sending blankets to a local animal shelter. She has collected 6,125 blankets and now needs to send them to the shelters. She is able to fit 29 blankets into each box. How many boxes will she need to send her blankets? The first thing we want to identify is the parts of the problem we need. So we're looking at 6,125 blankets, and we can put 29 into each box. So we need to find out how many boxes she will need to send her blankets. So that's going to give us the problem 6,125 divided by 29. Solving division problems with two-digit divisors is no different than solving with a one-digit divisor. The only difference is that two-digit divisor makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out where to start in our quotient. So we actually have an added step here, and for our first step, we're going to round the divisor to decide where to place the first digit of the quotient. So I'm looking at the divisor of 29, and I'm going to round it to make it a little bit easier number. And if I round 29 to a greatest place, I'm going to get the number 30. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I can determine if a number can be divided by 3 or 30 quicker than I can by 29. So let's look at this first problem. I want to look at my dividend, and I'm going to block off everything just to determine where I'm going to start my quotient. So the first thing that I want to identify is, can I get any groups of 29 out of 6? And the answer is no. So I'm going to put an X over the 6, so I know not to start my quotient there. Then I can move over, and now I'm going to look at 61. Can I get any groups of 29 out of 61? Well, of course, because 61 is larger than 29. This is where my rounding comes in. So if I come down here and I look, and I've rounded 29 to 30, it makes it a little bit easier for me to kind of find a starting point. So I know that 3 goes into 6 2 times, and 30 would go into 60 2 times. I'm going to choose 2 to start my answer. Now everything else in the division problem stays the same. So I have to remember that now that I've come up with my number of 2, everything else is going to refer to the dividend. I no longer need that estimate, and I don't want to use that as I'm multiplying in my problem. So I'm going to go with my 2, and now I'm going to move on to the next step. I'm going to multiply 2 times 29, and I'm going to have to do that off on the side. I would highly recommend using graph paper for this. Once I multiply 29 times 2, I get my answer of 58. And now I can subtract just like I normally would. I'm going to get 3, and I'm going to check, and I can see that 3 is less than 29, so I can move on to the next step and bring down my 2. Now I'm going to repeat. So I'm going to use my 30 again, or my estimate. I'm going to see how many groups of 30 can I get out of 32. Well, I can get one group of 30 out of 32, and I want to make sure that I am putting that one right above the 2. So now I'm going to multiply, and again I'm multiplying this number by my divisor. I no longer am going to be using my estimate. So 1 times 29 equals 29, and then I subtract, and I'm going to get 3. And I can see that 3 is less than 29, so I can move on to the next step, and I can bring down my 5. Again, I'm trying to determine how many groups of 29 I can get out of 35, and I can get one group of 29 out of 35. 1 times 29 is 29, so now I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to get 6. And again, I can see that 6 is less than 29. So now I have my answer, 211, and I'm going to write my remainder as a fraction, and I would have 6/29. However, my question asks, how many boxes will Mrs. Kelly need? And I know that I can fit 29 boxes or 29 blankets into each box. So I'm going to need 211 boxes, but I'm also going to need that extra box for those 6 that are left over. So the actual answer to my question would be 212 boxes. Okay, let's look at our next problem. Here I have 7,504 divided by 51. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find out where I'm going to start my answer. So I'm going to start here at the end and decide, can I get any groups of 51 out of 7? The answer is no, so I'm going to put an X above the 7. Now I'm going to move over and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to be seeing if I can get any groups of 51 out of 75. Now this is where I will want to round 51 to the greatest place so I can have a more manageable number. And I can get, because 75 is larger than 51, I know that I can get at least one group out of it. And if I'm looking at the number 50, I know if I double that it's going to be 100. So my good starting number would be to start with a 1. Now remember, you're multiplying that 1 by 51 and not by 50. So it would be 1 times 51 is 51, that I'll write here. And then I will subtract. 5 minus 1 is 4, and 7 minus 5 is 2, giving me 24. So again, I have to check. 24 is less than 51. So now I can move on to the next part, which would be bringing down the next digit, which is a 0. Giving me 240. So this is where that rounding is going to help a lot more. So I could pretty much easily see that I could only get one group of 51 out of 75, but figuring out how many groups of 51 I can get out of 240 might be a little bit more challenging. So if I'm looking at 50 and I'm going into 240, remember we can take off those zeros and now we're looking at how many groups of 5 can I get out of 24. Well, I can get 4 groups of 5 out of 24, so that gives me a good starting number. Now this level of math will probably require me to have another sheet of paper here on the side so I can multiply 51 times 4. And I get 204. Now when I bring 204 back into the problem and subtract, I get 36. 36 is a pretty big number to compare, however, it's still less than 51. So that means that my 4 is probably correct. So with my check, I can tell that I can move on to the next part. And I'm going to move this off to the side. And now I have my last number to bring down, which is a 4. Again, I'm going to go back to this 50 and see how many groups. Now, even though this isn't a 0 that I can cross off, I can kind of look at this first beginning number and say 36. Well, how many groups of 5 can I get out of 36? And I can get 7 groups of 5 out of 36, because 5 times 7 is 35. So then again, over on the side, I'm going to be doing my math. 51 times 7. Equals 357. When I put that back in and subtract, I get my answer of 7. And when I check, 7 is less than 51. So I can write my remainder here of 7 as a fraction, or I could write it as our remainder 7, or I can write it as a fraction and put 7 over 51, giving me my answer of 147, remainder 7, or 147 and 7/51. Let's move on to the next problem. So now I'm dividing, it's an even larger number. I'm dividing 69,384 by 84. So I'm going to see where to start my problem. So I'm going to see, can I get any groups of 84 out of 6? And I can't, so I'm going to put an X above here. Now I'm going to move on. Can I get any groups of 84 out of 69? I still can't, so I'm going to put an X above here. And now I'm going to move over to 693. So again, I'm going to want to estimate, and if I round 84 down to 80, it's going to give me a manageable number. I'm looking at the 8, and I'm going to see how many groups of 8 can I get out of 64 or 69. And I know that 8 times 8 is 64, so 8 might be a good starting point. Now I've gotten my answer of 672, so I'm bringing that back into the problem, and I'm going to subtract, and I get 21, and 21 is less than 84. So now I can move on to the next part of the problem. Now I'm looking at bringing down an 8. So again, I can go back to my estimate and say, okay, I have an 8, and I'm looking at something that's manageable just to get close. So I know that 8 times 2 is 16, but 8 times 3 is 24. So if I try 8 times 2 or 80 times 2, which would be 160, that might get me close enough. So I'm going to try a 2. It's going to give me an answer of 168. And so when I add that in here and I subtract, I'm going to get 50, which again seems like quite a large number, but it is still less than 84. So now I'm going to go into my last digit. I'm going to bring down my 4. And again, I'm looking here to see how many groups of 80 I can get out of 504, or how many groups of 8 I can get out of 50. So I'm going to try, since I know that my math facts at 8 times 6 is 48, I'm going to try a 6. 48 times 6 is going to give me 504, and when I put this back in here, I can see that I will have a remainder of 0. So therefore, I know my answer is 826. Pause the video while you try this next problem on your own. Don't forget to write your remainder as a fraction. Did you get 168 and 32/52? If not, look over your work, pause the video, and see what we did wrong. Pause the video again as you try this problem. 23,682 divided by 34. Well, did you get 696 and 18/34? I hope you did. Remember, long division is the same as dividing by a single-digit divisor. It just takes more time and more patience making sure that you're doing your math correctly. In this lesson, we have been dividing whole numbers by 2-digit divisors.